Ashley, would you please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Jones.
Here.
President Brady.
Here.
Mr. Hauser.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon's absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Great. Again, well, welcome everyone. We're pleased to have you here today, and we look forward to hearing your insights regarding our housing needs here in Cuyahoga County. Ashley, take a moment. Has anyone signed in for public comment?
Yes, Ms. Lou.
And Ms. Lou, if you would come forward.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, the least qualified person to come up here right now becomes a little bit more qualified. Today's topic is about housing fund. And we know that no affordable housing is a national crisis. However, who are suffering from it? Homeless people. Homeless people have been blamed. They don't work hard enough. They are lazy. They don't intend to get housing. However, there's no available housing for them to move in. Homeless shelter system actually rejects homeless people. We have all kinds of reasons today for people to be homeless, but there's no solution for all these people to get into the right type of housing to solve their problems. It's not just housing. For all the development or economic development all governments want to put on, doesn't matter which state, which county. Actually, all these things create something called gentrification. That means all the poor people will be driven away. That actually reinforces all kinds of segregations. So please help us. If we can utilize the housing fund we get, maybe we can decrease the damage, we can reverse the situation to actually improve the equality for everybody to access all the services and opportunities to better themselves and better the community together. Thank you.
Ashley, is anyone else signed in for public comment?
No, no one else is signed in.
All right. At this time, if we can have a motion for the approval of our minutes from the July 9th meeting.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Ayes have it. There are no matters referred to committee today, but we do have our presentation on in regards to our housing fund. And at this time, I believe, Mark, you come forward.
Thank you, Councilman and members of the committee, Councilman Miller. Thank you for the opportunity for Sally Martin and I to present on behalf of the County Housing Stakeholders Group and suggest some real and urgent priorities for Council to consider supporting through a new county housing fund. We know that housing is important for a host of reasons. There is research that shows that improvement in schools, improved health care, access to jobs count on decent, affordable, well-placed housing. We know it's a foundation for the success of families and senior citizens. And we know that investment in housing brings about increase in tax values, which is extremely important to the county and neighborhood stability. So why do we need a housing fund in addition to those reasons? I just want to highlight a few examples. In Cuyahoga County, over 96,000 households are housing insecure. That is, they pay more than 50% of their income on housing costs. That's households, not people. 1 in 3 of those folks are children. Low home sales, which we have in much of Cleveland, much of our inner suburbs, ought to be an opportunity for affordable home ownership, but we also know that our local banks, it's very hard to get a home loan priced at under $50,000, very hard. We know that in 2016, 1,600 home repair loan applications to banks were rejected by private lenders. About 750 of those were in east side of the city and east side suburbs, and that there's a significant disparity along racial lines relative to access to that private capital, which is a theme throughout much of our work and presentation. And finally, we know that there are still approximately 5,000 blighted homes in Cleveland, East Cleveland, and a couple hundred in other suburbs that are in need of demolition, and that many vacant homes can actually be saved through rehabilitation. Finally, that in terms of discrimination, throughout, and this is where the data gets a little tricky because it's at the Cleveland-Elyria MSA, but over 30,000 acts of housing discrimination take place annually in one form or another on basis of race and ethnicity, and that the LGBTQ community faces housing discrimination in over 30% of their attempted housing transactions. So let me give you some quick background, if I may. Our stakeholders group began meeting in 2015, and you can see on your screens the list of the members of that stakeholders group. We represent a wide variety of interests across the board, and it's a testament to the power of collaborative partnership, that our folks have stayed together, worked with the county, worked with Mr. Surratt, worked with other folks in the county, including yourself, Chairman, and during this time, we've accomplished a couple really important things. One is the final draft of a county housing plan, which I'll touch in a second. And secondly is that the fact that we've reached out to over 100 community organizations in doing this work. We've created a new fair housing group that didn't exist before. It's a coalition of local government, nonprofit housing development groups, and also fair housing advocates, working on issues together, where before often sat across the table from each other. And so we've done a whole host of other things, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to talk about the plan and just say that as the council considers housing priorities, this group, this housing stakeholders group, is available as a trusted resource and as a source of assistance as you see need. So the county housing plan final draft was completed last summer. And if I may, I'd like to take 1 minute and a half to read through the vision statement, because this is always so important. Cuyahoga County is committed to becoming a community known for its programs and policies for addressing the housing needs of all its residents, particularly low-income renters and homeowners, as well as those individuals and families who have severe housing cost burdens, face discrimination or foreclosure, or have difficulty obtaining economic self-sufficiency because of the lack of affordable housing or the lack of housing near economic opportunities. Cuyahoga County envisions a future where vacant and abandoned houses have all been rehabilitated or removed to stabilize neighborhoods, maintain and increase property values, and provide home ownership opportunities. That's a powerful vision for the work, we believe, of Cuyahoga County. Also at the slide are some common themes that we ran into, one of the most important of which is to improve cross-county coordination and communication between departments. So in the work of the County Housing Stakeholders Group, we identified 6 issue areas that are on your screen. Access to, they're in a little different order than are on my notes. So fair housing, housing insecurity, that is folks who are paying more than 50% across the board of their income on rent. Special populations, seniors, homeless, disabled, or reentry citizens, et cetera. Tax collection and delinquency, real estate taxes. Access to capital, leveraging private dollars to bring back into our community, and confidence in the housing market. So the housing plan contains high-level strategies. And since we've been meeting with Councilman Jones and other county leaders, we were asked today to share some more specifics, needs and opportunities that could be implemented through a county housing fund. And today we'll be sharing those with you as potential priorities for programming and funding for your consideration. We're not saying we have all the answers. We're not saying we have all the experts, but we'd like to put these on the list for your consideration. And as we talk about these, we'll be looking at the potential impact in the community. We also have a more detailed, 5-page Word doc that we decided to leave with you, pass it out at the end after we're done, because nothing's worse than having my feelings hurt by having you read something while I'm trying to talk. So thank you for your consideration on that, but it's a really good document that goes into more detail. So we're going to jump into these, and the first is fair housing. On fair housing, the document that you'll have recommends looking at two areas in the future here in terms of fair housing. And first, we want to commend Council President Brady and County Council for seriously looking at moving forward on anti-discrimination around sexual orientation and gender identity. It's a key, important factor in our community, and thank you for doing that. Source of income protection looks at protecting low-income tenants who, for part of their rent, is paid through some source of subsidy. And that source of subsidy could be a housing choice voucher, formerly known as Section 8. It could be a veterans voucher. It could be SSI income, right? Part of their rent. And under current law, landlords can refuse to rent to folks who have these sources for part of their rent. If you look at Craigslist, you can see line after line after line that says no Section 8. And our Fair Housing Center here in Cuyahoga County has really good research that shows two important factors I'd ask you to think about. One is that in some areas of the county where there's not a concentration of subsidized housing, landlords deny potential tenants with vouchers over 90% of the time. And the research that's referenced in our document shows where that happens. Secondly, the research shows that no Section 8 is very often a proxy for denying tenants because of race. Excuse me. So source of income anti-discrimination would cover between 15 and 20,000 renter households in the county, giving them fair opportunity throughout the county, most of whom are African American. Secondly, we also see landlords denying potential renters with criminal backgrounds, even when in most cases, those folks have had no reoffense for years. Because what we see is a blanket discrimination that happens that only leads to an increased likelihood of failure for that person and potential for reoffense, which is neither just nor in the long run is it cost effective for the county, as you can imagine. And then last slide before I hand it over to Sally is around, we combine two categories here, housing insecurity and special populations. We're seeing other practices throughout the country, throughout Ohio, et cetera, proven practices that make a true impact for folks who are very rent burdened, that is paying more than 50% of their income on rent, and for many other at-risk populations where we could look at a small investment, a time-limited investment that provides them stability for a stronger future. We're talking here about homeless households, for example, returning citizens' families in housing with lead hazards, young adults aging out of foster care, and a list of other at-risk populations. And we're recommending 4 practices and investments that could make a real difference for your consideration, and we can give you a lot more information on these. One is a shallow subsidy program for often for working households who are cost burdened. It's a partial rent that would not last for more than 3 years, and it could decline as that families or households' income increases. So often it's tied to an economic security jobs program. Secondly, short-term rental and utility assistance for households that are in crisis or need to move to a safe and affordable unit. Thirdly, a variation on that, but a little different, it would be for the county to do rental and utility deposit guarantees. That is for the county perhaps to look at providing a voucher to the landlord, to the utility company for that security deposit, for that utility deposit, which is often a strong barrier for a family being able to move. And where the examples that we've seen show that the county would also only have to pay in the occasion of default by that tenant, which is the minority of the cases. And then finally, eviction prevention. We've all learned what a serious problem eviction is, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of the stain that leaves on that tenant's record. Often it's not for great fault of the tenant. Often, it's because of landlords who have a very difficult time maintaining their units because of the small margins. Over 13,000 eviction filings happened in the county in 2016, 13,000 filings. As I said, causes issues for both landlords and tenants. So it's not just about tenants, but it's about landlords. And we're recommending the creation of an emergency one-time rental assistance program that, in a targeted way, could really make a difference. Again, for each of these best practices, we outline the potential impact, how much you might have to invest per case, how many that could really impact throughout the county in the more detailed paper that Ashley has, and that we're happy to leave with you as we're done here. Sally.
Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning.
The one thing I've learned in working in this field for 10 years is that the strength of the housing stock determines the strength of the county. There is good news. Mortgage foreclosures are down throughout the county, almost to 1995 levels. Home sale prices are up even in the weakest areas. And thanks to the county's demo fund, over half the homes that were blighting neighborhoods have been removed. We're grateful for your continued support of the blight removal efforts. We have a way to go, but we can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. There are over 30,000 tax delinquent residential properties in the county, but there's some good news here too. In February, the county began an aggressive outreach campaign to delinquent taxpayers. Phone calls are being made, letters are being sent. So far, the results are very positive. More than $3 million has been collected, and some taxpayers who were unaware of their delinquent balances are even sending thank you notes to the county. We're grateful for your support on this effort and your commitment to ongoing staffing support that's so important to this work. The housing crisis had a disparate impact on areas with the highest concentration of minority residents. The east side of Cleveland and the eastern ring suburbs in particular have not fully recovered their housing values and are only between 30 and 60% back to their peak values from 2005. The county as a whole is 96% back to peak values. This alarming disparity has left many residents without the equity needed to obtain capital for critical repairs. In terms of home sales, in areas with median values under $50,000, mortgage lending is hard to come by. Many of these areas have become cash markets, and home ownership is declining. Worst of all, mortgage loan applications in the hardest hit areas are almost non-existent, showing that residents have all but given up on obtaining a bank loan. Two studies that were just released just in July dramatically show these disparities. Cuyahoga County Mortgage Lending Patterns by Michael Lepley and Lenore Mangiarelli from the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research, and Housing Market Recovery in Cuyahoga County, Race and Geography Still Matter, an analysis of housing trends from 1995 to 2017 by Frank Ford from Western Reserve Land Conservancy. The Cleveland metropolitan area has the dubious distinction of being one of the most segregated areas of the country. As public officials, we must address this head-on and begin to right the wrongs that have led to this unfair disparity. We've put much thought, research, and energy into the ideas to address these grave concerns. In terms of our housing stock, our recommendations focus on financial capabilities counseling, home repair programs, and mortgage lending. The report that you will receive that accompanies this presentation has been condensed to a few pages, but detailed backup information and supporting research is available for each recommendation. Out of nearly 450,000 residential parcels countywide, over 325,000 are over 50 years old, and over 58,000 are over 100 years old. These aging homes require repair, yet in the hardest hit areas of the county, the bulk of these repairs aren't happening. As we have seen time and again, when public money is invested, private money follows. We are recommending that a housing fund be created to provide financial capabilities and credit counseling programs to assist residents in accessing home repair funding and supporting those with delinquent property taxes. The county has provided ongoing support of local nonprofit counseling agencies for years, but we believe this needs to be further expanded to address critical unmet needs. We also recommend a grant program that provides funding to homeowners for needed repairs, such as modifications that allow seniors to remain in their homes, as well as grants to municipalities to coordinate citywide repair and maintenance programs to address specific local concerns. We ask your support for a countywide home repair loan guarantee program, modeled after a program that has been working successfully in Cleveland Heights for over 40 years with only a 6% default rate. This program would provide home repair loans to those who cannot obtain a bank loan but have the ability to repay. Working with a lender partner or multiple partners, funds would be placed on deposit with a participating bank to allow a loan to be made and would only be accessed in case of default. The success of the program lies in the critical counseling piece. The Home Repair Resource Center in Cleveland Heights helps borrowers determine what they can afford, obtain bids, and monitor that repairs are made prior to releasing the funds. We believe that the Guarantee Fund, if it were capitalized, our existing housing counseling network could help facilitate these loans countywide. Guarantee funds on deposit would earn a modest rate of return and would potentially come back to the county if the program was discontinued. Key Bank has expressed interest in having the program expanded beyond Cleveland Heights. In neighborhoods that have seen little recovery, we feel that acquisition rehab lines of credit would help stabilize those markets and encourage private investment. The program would provide grant funds to cover potential appraisal gaps that impede rehab efforts due to low home sale prices and provide loan loss reserves to local community development financing agencies, or CDFIs, to cover the risk of lending to rehabbers in weak markets. Women and minority-owned businesses would be encouraged to participate. We ask for your support in creating a fund that facilitates the development of a local CDFI that originates mortgages in areas of the county that have seen little to no residential lending activity in the past 10 years. A loan loss reserve fund created in partnership with the City of Cleveland would help kickstart this alternative residential lending platform that will provide homeownership opportunities in low and moderate income communities that have been essentially kept out of traditional mortgage lending for over a decade. Lastly, the county has a very successful community development supplemental grant program, the CDSG, that we believe can be augmented and expanded to serve as a housing innovation fund to allow cities and CDCs to launch transformative projects to address the conditions that they're seeing on the ground. Thank you for your consideration of these ideas, and we look forward to your input and urge your support.
There is one last slide, and it says, McDermott, bring this to a quick close. In closing, we sincerely appreciate your time. We sincerely appreciate the work of Councilor and the department there and working with us. We sincerely appreciate the opportunity to actually make a difference in the county. We realize that we've thrown a lot out here. Quite a few options, but a well-researched and a flexible county housing fund could implement all of these priorities going forward in the future. A fund is about ongoing investment, both in neighborhood stability and in family stability, in both cases. And both, as you know, are so closely tied together. It could support pilot projects that you deem important to address critical needs. It could address specific populations as you look at this. And it could build upon itself over the years. We do have one very strong recommendation, which may not be agreed by all, but it's that the fund should not be limited to type of use so much, but that it should really be targeted to individuals and families at 30% or less of median income. Those who have fixed income, those who are on working but on very, very low wage jobs, and also the hardest to serve population, as we've talked about, like formerly homeless, formerly incarcerated, individuals aging out of foster care, et cetera. Want to stress something that Sally also said, which is it's proven in other locations that a fund like this can leverage and will leverage both private and philanthropic sources. So the stakeholder group really urges County Council on the establishment of a proposed housing fund. And we stand ready to support your efforts over the years in the immediate and near future on this work. And thank you very much for your time.
Okay. And thank you for the presentation. And you can stay for a moment. There may be questions by the committee. We know in the last budget cycle, this council did not approve the $3 million roughly requested, but we felt it had not been fleshed out enough. And this today is an opportunity to begin that conversation. So we appreciate what you've shared with us today. And I'd like to take a moment and open it up to council if there are any questions by committee on what we've heard today.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for your presentation today. I just wanted to respond to the discussions during the budget process, because I'm sure different members of council may have a different takes on you know, what occurred. I agree with the chairman of the committee that there was a consensus generally in the council that we just had not been exposed to enough information before the request. Perhaps that's our fault. Perhaps, you know, the administration had been down the road a little further than we had, and we weren't working closely enough together. But I know for myself, just so it's sort of like hopefully understandable, one of the reasons that I was not convinced was because, to me, the amount of money seems so insignificant and the vision so broad. I really have problems with passing legislation to create programs that we don't give the resources to function, so that we have a program. We can pat ourselves on the back if we think we're doing a good thing, but if we don't have the resources to make that good thing really happen to any significant degree, then I don't really want to be part of that. And so I just wanted to express myself.
I appreciate that. Can't say I've always been successful, but I've always tried to do things as chair of a committee that were transformational, that genuinely had a sincere impact on the residents of this community. And again, I see this as a start of that conversation. You shared a lot of information with us, but there were a few questions that I just had. When I think about from one end of this county to the next, you mentioned how much value was lost in the east side of Cleveland and East Cleveland. But share with us, is there a connection between that and the communities like, say, a Westlake? Does that have an impact on their property taxes paid, or Garfield Heights? Or is there a connection, or is there no connection?
I may not be the best person in this room to speak on this, but I would say it's been well documented. The tax burden becomes disproportionately shifted to those outlying areas. So yeah, it does. I think we're all interconnected, and I don't think what happens to one doesn't affect another. I think it's going to affect everyone adversely if these areas are not performing and they're weak.
So someone in a Westlake could be paying a higher tax burden because of the lack of tax dollars generated.
Yes.
in some of the wasteland areas of different other parts of the county. So someone in a county could be a next door neighbor to a house in Westlake, and their tax burden could be totally different. And they're more neighbors than someone in this county is to someone in East Cleveland. That's fair to say? Okay. Well, again, before I ask any other questions, are there any questions from the committee? Councilman Miller.
Mr. Chairman, to the representatives, first I'd like to say that that I appreciate all the very hard work that all of you have done, and I truly think this is an area where county government can greatly profit by working collaboratively with people in the community who have been working on these issues for years, and I think housing is one of the most important issues we have. If you look at income security, housing, and health care, well, those are probably the big three, and the success and the well-being of our community depends on how well we do on them. The concern I would share is the same that was expressed by the council president. Right now, the county is in a position where we don't have resources to add things, and in fact, some contraction is going to need to take place because of the loss of $27 million a year in Medicaid sales tax revenue. And so we're going to have to identify what would be a critical mass, as the council president implied, a sufficient level of funding so that we could run a meaningful new program and figure out where those resources can come from. So I think that's what our challenge is, and I certainly welcome any suggestions from our collaborative partners, and we're going to try to work on it internally here and see if we can think outside the box and come up with some ways to get this going. Thank you.
If I may, the banks have a role in this. And there are 3 banks in our area with community benefits agreements, and we haven't seen the money hit the ground. Key Bank, Huntington, and Fifth Third. So the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition, which is similar in many ways to the stakeholders with a lot of crossover membership, we've been working on these issues for 2 years. We've been meeting with banks, we've been talking to them. The county can use their strength to leverage their, where you're placing your dollars, which lending institutions you're putting your money in, to make sure that those institutions are supporting the community. So we'd urge you to use your position of strength to help us in that argument, to get these large institutions to invest in the community in programs such as the ones we've described to you. They certainly could be an equity partner in this, and should be. They caused this, they should play a role in fixing it.
We certainly do have that leverage. Councilman Gallagher? I'm sorry, Councilman Miller, were you finished with your thought?
Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
I think I'm going to say what everybody else has said is, I can't think of a county in Ohio that's done more in this area than Cuyahoga County the past 7.5 years. I wasn't too happy the way in which the demolition fund was sprung upon the county council without discussion. We worked through it and finished it without that administration, quite honestly, and made it a success with all of our partners. It was very difficult with our budget. Our last budget was very difficult, as Mr. Miller said, and we are facing even a worse budget in 2020. While I appreciate the efforts and ideas, I really wish people would look at our budget and what we're up against. As Council President said, I don't mind getting involved in meaningful changes, things that are meaningful to people. Right now, the areas that you're identifying right now disproportionately are receiving the majority of the money from Cuyahoga County. To, slide more money that way, I think is going to pique the interests of others that are paying for it. So if we're going to do something like that, it's got to work. It's got to have a track record. It's got to work. It's got to be significant. And unfortunately, right now, we're not in a position, I don't think, you're looking at 3 million. I think you're really looking at what we did with the demolition fund, it to be significant. And we're just unfortunately not in that position right now to do that. I would agree that we probably need to take a look and a lead on that because we've been doing that, and I think we've been successful. There's been some slings and arrows thrown our way for it, but, it is what it is, and this is the atmosphere we find ourselves in. So I would suggest, if I were you, to narrow the scope on what you're looking at or what groups you're looking at. I've always held close to my heart the senior population. I believe, and I'm getting there myself, but I truly, truly believe that we have forgotten the people that have gotten us here. We have forgotten the people that have made this county what it is, and it's a great county. We've had our difficulties, and we've gotten through those, and we're moving our way back up slowly. So maybe if that's an area that you would identify, I would certainly be much more interested in pursuing an avenue to at least pilot program through that group, which, by the way, is huge and the largest senior population in the state of Ohio by far. By far. We're not the biggest county, but we have 100,000 more seniors than Franklin County does. So a difficult task regardless the path we take, but I would suggest that's a path of least resistance that maybe you might want to look at. But thank you.
May I, Mr. Chairman, to the council? We number one, two items. Number one, we're certainly not insensitive to the budget question. We're not in your, we don't sit in the seats you're sitting in right now. And we don't, we're not the experts. We don't have an answer to that. We're the advocates. Number two, we absolutely sit ready to, Mr. Chairman, you, any members of the committee say, hey, let's look more deeply at these 3 things, or these 5 things. We'll do that with you. We have expertise. We can gain expertise. We can get the research. We can help shape the program. We can bring the banks in and do that together. We were hesitant to go from, 20 items to 3 because, we don't know what the pleasure of the committee is, honestly. So the more that we can do this together and focus it and bring it down to a couple pilots perhaps, we're absolutely happy to and stand ready to do that. Thank you.
Well, the pleasure of the chair is to one day allow everyone to have the American dream, have a house with a white picket fence, pretty green grass out front. And it may not be everyone, but if we can get a significant number, and that would be my end game. And how do we get there?
I just had a few words. I'm going to echo what Councilman Gallagher said. As you guys were talking, I wrote down East Cleveland, reentry, seniors, and our demolition fund. I know you guys continue to use Cleveland Heights as an example, which is in District 10, but we also have East Cleveland. And to Councilman Gallagher's point, we have a demolition fund, and I'm finding, representing East Cleveland, is that a lot of cities, especially struggling cities, don't even have the resources to get resources. And so I think we have to put some measures in place. We have money in our demolition fund to tear down houses in East Cleveland, yet we don't even have, the city can't even afford an inspector to go in the house to see if it's time to tear it down or not. So we have to put some things in place to help these cities even attain a lot of these resources. As far as our senior population, we have to do more. I know talking with Dr. Jones before he left, not only do you have to be old, but you have to be poor as well. And so a lot of these programs, I think it's great if we can actually do some of these home repairs. But what I'm finding, even trying to help my grandmother find resources, I think you have to make less than $20,000 a year. I don't even know how people would live off less than $20,000, but you have to be old and poor. And so if we can, I guess, pilot this down and do it right, I think it's a good idea. But I don't think the county can afford. I think it's great if we do things in housing, but I don't think we can afford to waste money or even have a fund like this and people not be able to access it. So just be a little more strategic if we do try to implement this.
Thank you, Councilman. And just to echo his point, we don't know what the solution is yet. I see this as a first brainstorming session to get everything out on the table and start that conversation. But to Councilman's point, this county is divided into so many different types of communities with so many different needs. I see the ultimate solution having a common denominator that would have a positive impact in the East Cleveland and east side of Cleveland, again, in all other parts of the community, but not a solution that where when it's finished, said we've had a positive impact in one area, but we're still struggling with. That means we didn't find that common denominator. We didn't find the solution that will answer the questions that the councilman just brought forward. So again, I know we're not coming up with all the answers today, but that's the direction that I would like this committee to try to have an impact in. I don't know if there are any other questions. I do. I'll share this with you. I've talked with mayors of some of my city, all the mayors of my cities, but one in particular who's been the most passionate has been Mayor Annette Blackwell, and you may have had conversations with her as well. The mayor of Garfield Heights, Vic Kalova, they've had a similar problem, and it's that there are an influx of minorities coming into the community, and there are those who are moving out of the community. And as the housing needs for buying homes, there's a challenge. They're saying the banks are not lending. I've heard said from the mayors, the banks weren't lending under $200,000. Well, the average home value of a quality home in Maple might be around $50,000. So if they're not lending under 200, then you have literally and effectively blocked out an entire population of coming in, buying a nice home, and being a homeowner, and it leads to renting. So if the balance of home ownership drops and renters increase, well, then the property values start to go down. You know, the renter just the landlord doesn't take care of the home in the same way that a homeowner does. No character assassination, that's just a reality, okay? But then the property values come down, which means the property taxes come down, which means the dollars to the school system comes down, which means just the overall impact to the community, that city starts to devolve. And it's something we saw in East Cleveland maybe back in the early 70s. And after 45 years, you see what that means with the lack of, as you have put in your paperwork, access to capital. So that's certainly one ingredient that's needed. But those are the challenges. How do you preserve a Maple Heights and other first ring suburbs? That's not the only one. How do you preserve, but at the same time rebuild a community like East Cleveland, which has so many more challenges? So that wasn't a question, but just throwing that out there. Any comments? Or?
As you know, last summer, we got $200,000 from the Cleveland Foundation to do a property survey in 5 cities, including Garfield and Maple. And what we found was that the property conditions were very good overall, but it was this disparate impact in lending and access to capital that were causing issues for people. Especially you see this with seniors, and you're quite right. In South Euclid, we've been able to start a nonprofit, and we granted out over $235,000 in the last few years for home repairs. And what we found, we had seniors in incredible need. In fact, seniors that were living on less than $12,000 a year here trying to maintain their houses. So if these cities are to remain viable, we absolutely have to do something. So I think alternative lending platforms like what we've discussed, where mortgages can be written for under $50,000, done through a CDFI, would be very transformative. I think a loan guarantee program where people who would be denied a loan to make repairs to their home could get that loan would be transformative to entering suburbs, for sure. So your observations are spot on and quite correct.
The one piece I would add is that what we're seeing a lot in the markets that you're talking about, Chairman, are is an appraisal gap, right? Between the value based upon the appraisal and the ultimate need for the sale or the repair and sale, et cetera. And we certainly have great models where public funds have been used to bridge those appraisal gaps and leverage the private dollars. It takes longer to get paid back. There's a little more risk involved there, but that's what we need to do in order to address the kinds of needs you're talking about. Not in every situation, but in many. And that's just a matter of how the banks need to do business, honestly. They, after the crash, the appraisals and the banks are 100% separate. There's no influence, no interchange between those institutions, because that's partly what led to the crash, was, shall we say, inaccurate and perhaps inappropriate appraisal approaches. But that appraisal gap financing is something that we've got a lot of experience with and can work with. Thank you.
Just to put a face to what you just said, I live again on the east side of Cleveland, 2 blocks from Cleveland Clinic's main campus on East 73rd and Cedar Avenue. There was a home on East 68th and Cedar that I bought. It was just a small little house. At the time, in early 90s, $5,000 was the cost of the house. They wanted to sell it, emotionally distressed with the property. I bought it and fixed it up. New homes were built all around the house, okay? And so the value went up, but it didn't go up as high as the dollar amount I was able to borrow from one of those subprime lenders. I borrowed it and I paid it back. Okay, paid it back. But it told me right there, if someone else was lent that type of money on a house and they didn't pay it back, the lender was not going to be able to sell it for what they gave. So for that to have happened across the country, loans that haven't been made on houses that were not, that just did not possess that type of value, then I could see how the banks got beaten in that case. But they're not victims. Those banks were paid back through TARP dollars. They received a lot of money, and they still grabbed every homeowner by the throat and said, pay me back everything you owe, when they had already been paid through TARP. So they were doubly enriched when they used our county sheriffs to put people out and their sofas out on the front lawn, and then they didn't cut the grass. So they have a part to play.
For sure.
One note I'll say, we deposit with many of those banks you just mentioned, and we do have that leverage as the administration right now works with creating a master plan with these banks. They are having those conversations, I would expect now or very shortly, around what services they will provide to us for our deposits. Right now, many of the services we get are more transactional, lock boxes and things like that. The Bank of Lakewood does provide a housing plan, a rehab plan, and they don't receive the type of dollars the larger banks are getting. So there certainly is much room for service from the banks.
Mr. Chairman, and as Sally mentioned, 3 of those larger banks have community benefits agreements now. And in addition, I would encourage, Mr. Chairman, you and the committee to also understand the status of the various banks' CRA assessments, which happens every 2-3 years, depending. There's a couple.
CRA?
Community reinvestment, yeah. And they get to needing to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the community very specifically. There are a few members of our stakeholders group who are pretty expert on the CRA side, and members of, as Sally said, the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition also.
Gotcha. You mean back in the 70s, the Community Reinvestment
Yeah,
Act?
Right.
I mean, it's
So
what,
they have a federal mandate, if I'm understanding what you're saying,
Federal mandate, and
to
they
do
look
what's
at
not
it.
being done at this point.
they look at it very closely, especially as they enter the last year of their assessment period.
Okay.
Like any of us, they get a little more urgent at that point in the last year.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. You know, it seems to me that there ought to be some way that we can be effective in these areas. I wonder what your response is, like the position we find ourselves in, not just here, but across the board in a lot of cases, is that we don't have, in many cases, not all cases, we don't have the kind of support for even what you're conceptualizing by state government. Not everybody in state government, but by most. We don't have a federal government where people even conceptualize the community and the values that you're sharing with us, or your goals. We don't have any of that to work with. And of course, you can understand how doubly frustrating it is if you are sympathetic to these goals and these ideas. And so for me, that dilemma becomes, again, I think it's important for us to understand in the broader picture. But I think that in order to be able to get the council to be able to focus and be able to be helpful, we really do have to narrow what we're talking about down to something that is not overwhelming. It's, we're trying to save one person in a boat of 100 that are drowning is worthwhile. But you've got to understand that that's what you're doing, and not, and be able to live with that. I really would like to see some efforts in this regard, and I think it would have to be a real strong coalition of people around the community who would be of like mind and be together, and we'd have to obviously involve, as you know better than I, who many of the players are in that regard. I do think that people that are in some of the top positions in the community need to be part of this and frankly throw their weight around a little bit. I think more can be done, but I think you have to take the authority that you have and you have to push it further and harder than people have been able to push it so far. I know that we needed to be realistic. I know we need to negotiate with the banks and with everybody involved in a way that's not fantastical or so idealistic that we might as well be talking only to each other. But there is an amount of authority due to the role that the county plays and the city of Cleveland and others that is significant, and that authority, I believe, can be used to help persuade people that if we have goals like this that are important to our community, that we expect them to be partners in it to the extent that they possibly can. I don't think the county can create a sort of an artificial economy, and so I just want to have our feet on the ground. I know that many of you have worked for many years on these issues and are quite knowledgeable, and we do want to help, but I think we have to be able to understand how that works for us in view of all the other challenges that we have.
All right. Well, I agree with everything the council president has just stated. Whether this falls between the solution that we're able to, the players, whether between 3 million, 30 million, we don't have the dollars right now. We certainly have those conversations, but I believe we can point in the right direction. I think we can start to crystallize around what the solution looks like, and all the players are not in the room right now, and we can move towards that. When I look at your plank of from access to capital to all the needed items, I've used this analogy with you before. This is a cookbook. You know, you have laid out necessary ingredients, access to capital, and the other items. But how do we, you know, what are the cooking instructions? How do we come into a Westlake or into a East Cleveland or Garfield, and what do we do? How many people are served? You know, that is what we need to get to. And all the players aren't in the room, but that's what we need to get to. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Frank Ford forward.
Chairman Jones, members of council, thanks for the opportunity to come forward and speak. I just finished a housing trend study. It's the fourth in a series. And when I first did this 4 years ago, it was only, I think, 10 pages. It looked at foreclosure trends and vacancy. This one is 70 pages. It's much more detailed. And I've only just started distributing it as of Thursday. And I think that all of the members of council do have it now. This one looks at mortgage delinquency and mortgage foreclosure trends, tax delinquency and foreclosure, vacancy and the subset of vacancy, which is the most blighted properties, to track those, home sale price trends, and mortgage lending for both home purchase and home repair. Sally and Mark actually, I think, used some of my data and went over a lot of the high points, so I'll try not to repeat them. But let me just start with some good news, because I think it's worth focusing on what is going on that's really good. First, again, mortgage foreclosure is practically down to 1995 levels. That's extraordinary. Now, tax delinquency is going in the other direction. It is going up. But on the positive side, the county treasury has been working for the last 2 years with housing advocates to implement recommendations, and they're doing a really outstanding job. I really commend Treasurer Murray, and specifically want to call out Mike Sweeney, who many people know has been working for the county for years, is now heading up a unit to reach out to delinquent taxpayers. It's one of close to a dozen specific things the county's doing that I can give you more detail, and they're detailed in the study, but I do want to point that out. That's a real plus. The County Land Bank is partnering with the Treasury and the prosecutor at a very high level of efficiency to move blighted properties to either demolition or productive reuse. Blight that undermines the housing market is being reduced thanks to this council and the demolition fund. The suburbs, with the exception of East Cleveland, the suburbs have pretty much come to where there's not that much left. Most of their need has been met. And as others have already mentioned, the remaining blight is in the east side of Cleveland and in East Cleveland. Median home sale prices are certainly not falling. They are coming up everywhere in the county. The difference is that they're coming up slower in some parts of the county, but they are coming up, and that's a good trend. Another thing that's I note in the study is that not only are prices coming up, but the number of normal arm's length sales between buyer and seller is also increasing. So if you go back 10 years ago, we had many transactions that were foreclosures, bank to bank. Those are moving away, and we're getting more healthy, normal transactions between buyers and sellers. In terms of the issues, findings regarding the issues, probably the biggest one, which has already been mentioned by Sally and Mark, is this disparity between where is the blight and the home sale prices that are suffering. And it's definitely east and west, and it's definitely along racial lines. The majority outer white suburbs and western suburbs have nearly recovered most of their value from the foreclosure crisis. The majority African American east side of Cleveland and East Cleveland are still only at about 20 to 50% of their value from when they peaked. And the peak was, for almost all suburbs and neighborhoods, was between 2005 and 2006. I just want to share one of the more interesting things that I found. In 2005, the east side of Cleveland and the west side of Cleveland, the median prices were almost the same. West side was 89,000, east side was 80,000. That's not that big of a difference. What happened over the next 10 years is that the east side of Cleveland had significantly more foreclosure and therefore more abandonment and blight, and more properties that need demolition. And as a result, the west side went from 89,000 to 60,000 median. The east side went from 80,000 to 25,000. So there's a huge difference in the impact of the foreclosure crisis, east and west.
Frank, we'd like to ask
yeah,
a
please.
I'm sorry, Frank, I
Yeah,
don't mean to
no,
interrupt
go
you,
right
but I
ahead.
just want to
Yeah.
get this straight, because I understand what you're saying, but are you talking about the county or the city?
I'm sorry, I did start by saying the east side of Cleveland was, in 2005,
Yeah.
was
That's what I
80,000.
thought you meant.
Yeah,
just
no,
wanted
no,
to
I
make
was
sure
using
we
it as
know
an
what we're talking
example of,
about, because see, this is part of what has to be, and you know,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading
Right.
the latest. I haven't read the latest, okay? But this is partly what happens here, is that we have a county council that represents an entire county, right? Some of it fairly affluent, some of it middle class, a lot of it very working class, and a lot of it impoverished. And so when we come together and try to talk about these programs, people are hearing different things. Many people, when they talk about these programs, believe they're talking about the inner city and urban Cleveland, and in many cases they are. But they're talking to people who are representing completely different communities than that. So they're trying to persuade them to buy into what needs to be done in other communities rather than the ones that they represent. Because we're all interconnected, and we can't, you know, it would be foolish to think that we can just ignore problems because we don't have them in our own backyard. But nevertheless, to get a broad-based council that's bipartisan, representing very many different types of communities, to appropriate funding for programs is trickier than winning an argument or a debate about what's good and what we should do for this community. And I'm certainly not debating you. I just
No, I
want
hear
to
you.
make sure we understand the context of this committee is a county-wide committee on community development.
Right. And of course, the study covers all, it's like 90 geographies, 30-some Cleveland neighborhoods and 50-some suburbs, as well as the 5 major regions, east, west, inner suburbs, so on. The data is all there. I comment on all of it. The major finding, though, seems to me inescapable to point out that there is a disparity and the impact by geography. But I want to go back to something that a question that was asked earlier was a good one, and Sally answered it, which was do these conditions in east side of Cleveland, for example, and East Cleveland, do they impact somebody in Westlake? And what Sally was referring to was a study that was actually done by my organization maybe 3 years ago, which I should probably resurrect that and circulate it for the council members, because it clearly showed that because there is less tax revenue being collected from east side of Cleveland, for example, and Cleveland in general, and certainly some of the inner ring suburbs, there's a shift in tax burden which has happened. And so the Westlakes and Bay Village, they are actually picking up a share. So in fact, the subtitle of that study is Everybody Pays. I think it's something like the cost of abandonment, well, everybody does pay one way or the other. So you raised a good point, and probably I should have referenced that study, but.
Oh, no, don't misunderstand me,
yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
It's not a, it's just a, it's just a discussion. Sometimes I feel like, not you, I'm talking about all of us are like sometimes talking past each other because we're not using the same reference points in terms of how we think about what we've got to work with here.
Right.
And in many cases, what you're talking about is just a microcosm of the entire country.
Yeah.
In terms of where the most attention is needed, but where is the money going to come from, and how we're represented. So I just want to have a real brutally, honest conversation about who we are and what we can do.
Right. Well, and I don't want to take a lot of your time. I know I'm prepared to come back and do a more thorough briefing with charts, graphs, and have a thorough discussion about the detail after everybody's had a chance to read it. Do you want me to continue with just a couple highlights, or I don't want to?
There's a few more highlights.
It's at your discretion. Okay. I think what Sally mentioned, that there's definitely these. So the disparate blight, the difference in blight leads to the difference in housing market. The blight undermines the housing market conditions. Home sale prices are obviously lower on the east side of Cleveland and in some of the inner ring suburbs. What that also leads to is what Mark and Sally mentioned, is that when you have home sales less than 50, you have values in home sales less than 50,000, you have a loan officer who's thinking, well, a $200,000 loan is going to get me a lot more compensation. And banks, I think, unfortunately, are not thinking about how do they encourage their loan officers to be motivated to make those loans and the $50,000 neighborhoods. And one of my recommendations is that banks should be thinking about that. And I certainly agree with Sally and Mark that the county, the council, and the administration could use its leverage to probably help move banks in that direction. I'll just leave you with one other example of this. It's been referenced a little bit when Sally and Mark talked about a loan guarantee fund for home repair. If you think about it this way, if the county, and I'm just going to use a number, don't get scared if I say $1 million, but if the county were to say, we have $1 million, we're going to approach the banks we currently deposit money with and say, as a condition in the future, going forward, before we deposit money with you, we're looking for a bank that's willing to say, if you put the $1 million on deposit, we will make a commitment to loan $5 million in home repair loans. Now, the program that Sally mentioned, the Key Bank Challenge Fund, has a 96% success rate. And those are people who already were denied. By default, they were denied to begin with. Then they were reconsidered. So that's an incredible success rate with people that were already denied. If that program could be expanded to do other neighborhoods other than Cleveland Heights, now maybe the default rate might be a little higher. But if you think about what I said, $1 million on deposit to guarantee $5 million, that's 20%. I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a 20% default rate. And the key to this, and this hasn't been mentioned yet this morning, but the key, what makes that program work, it's not the guarantee fund, it's the technical assistance that's built in. So when those borrowers got denied for that home repair loan, they're reconsidered, and there's a financial counselor to work with them to make sure, can they repay that loan? How are they going to do that? The second piece is they have a construction counselor who then helps them work through the bids, so they're correctly accepting bids that are good, and then that financial assistance person does the final inspection to make sure the work was done. So there are pieces built into that. That's why that program has such a high success rate. But I think this is an example of, you want to use your money successfully. You want to use your money smart. You want to use it and leverage other money. I think this is a great example. It should at least be looked at. How could you take all the money you have on deposit, approach banks with a different perspective and say, we've got this money, here's what we need from you in return. We're looking for a bank that's willing to do this home repair loan guarantee program. You commit to $5 million, we're going to put $1 million on deposit. And if it's successful, you actually are going to get most of your money back anyway. So this isn't a giveaway. So I've taken a lot of time, probably. I went into great detail with something. You might have been looking for the 20,000-foot level overview.
Mr.
But
Chairman,
yeah.
Frank, I know you're somewhat, we'll just say we're probably contemporaries in
Yes.
a lot of ways.
Oh, yes. Yes, I have gray hair and you have. We both
I'm
do.
saying, you
Yeah.
know, just this is all I'm saying, you know, you know, as I do, that we've been discussing this in exactly the same way for over 40 years.
Yeah, with banks and,
So, yeah.
yeah.
And how we would be able to use our leverage and what we might be able to do. And that doesn't mean I'm giving up here.
No.
I'm just saying, I don't want, you know, this is not a new idea.
Right.
And so you want, you're looking for something in terms of leadership in this community
that we have up to this point apparently not been able to find. And I don't want to make it that simple. I'm saying that's not, I wasn't really so much talking about Cleveland as I'm saying it's very rare. You want this community in many ways to be more progressive than communities almost anywhere in America. So would I, ideally. And, but we've had the same discussion for decades. So there's something standing in our way, and I hope it's not us. So, you know, I'd like to continue to work with you guys.
Sure.
As we have in the past.
Right. Well, my main goal is to provide information that shed a light on something, and that's what really the study was intended to do, give you guys information and all of us to make better decisions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ford.
Sure.
We appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
And I'll make one final comment on that. My family's had a business where we struggled along for years. Small business, tried to get loans and could not get them from the conventional banks. It wasn't until the City of Cleveland, the Empowerment Zone federal program, and Mayor Michael R. White, who personally said to the banks, that's my project. If we deposit with our City of Cleveland residents' monies with you, if you don't lend to this business and others in their pipeline, then we're not going to deposit with you anymore. So he took a strong-armed approach, and they made the loan with us, and we repaid it in full in 10 years. That was 1998 to 2008. And as a result, we have a pretty building with pretty green grass out in front, and our employees have increased, and some of them have new homes right there in the neighborhood. So had that been replicated over and over, up and down the street, people drive from East Cleveland, from Cleveland Heights to downtown, and they drive down our commercial street of Cedar Avenue and other streets, and if they looked like some of the housing developments, it would be a total different perception of the city of Cleveland for those traveling through. But it takes that investment. And may not take the strong arm approach, it may. It may be able to negotiate with our deposits. But I think all those tools are on the table. And it's more than just money. We've talked about, and I just threw those numbers out, 3 million, 30 million, but those are certainly not hard numbers. But there are other things that we can do that may not necessarily involve our dollars that I think can be impactful.
Well, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yep.
And last, we have spent a lot of time, but this won't work if the administration is not on board and has their say. So I'm asking if Ken Surratt could come forward and just give us some closing comments and thoughts from the administration.
Sure. Good morning, Ken Surratt from Department of Development. First, I'd like to thank the council on this committee, particularly for listening and being thoughtful about housing. It's very clear from your comments that this is something very important to you all. I think within the communities you represent, there's different challenges depending on the populations. But we are one county, and we need to address this and work together. Secondly, just again, thank all of the housing stakeholders who have been doing. Many people have been doing this work for most of their careers, and you know, I truly respect it. It's a lot of hard work. It doesn't probably always feel as rewarding, but you know, nevertheless, you know, these people work tirelessly to continue to move the ball forward for our residents. So to close, you know, I was listening to the comments, the presentation, the research. And listening and taking notes. And I will take all of this back to the county executive as well. I think the most important thing I want to leave you all with just a few things. One, there are examples of housing funds in Franklin and Hamilton County. We can provide more information about that. They are funded through different sources and at different levels. Just to give you all some thoughts, and again, more information in helping your decision making. Two, I don't want to underestimate the amount of money you know, or that a few $1 million could actually, the impact that it could have, and leveraging and scaling programs that already have existed. Again, it won't cure all of our ills, but I think President Brady, you said that it's still worth saving that one person if you can. And I'd like to continue the conversation with the stakeholders and council in moving in those directions. And to kind of underscore that point, you know, in what the continuing message that I heard about focus. I think I agree with that. I think that's right. Especially, you know, I will say we are definitely sensitive to our budget where it is right now. But one, I think a lot of what was presented as ideas, and again, I think to show the thoughtfulness of these recommendations are really existing things. They're not necessarily new. It's really about kind of scaling things and expanding on things that we already know to work. So I think the other part of this, and I know there's some concerns that I heard President Brady about the banks kind of ponying up, but where we can leverage dollars, you know, again, our few dollars can go that much further and help people. So I think that could be a filter in this kind of focus and kind of thinking through what we do. As well as any of these opportunities to have the chance to kind of revolve the dollars and hopefully grow those dollars over time. So those are the just some thoughts that I had as I was listening to all the comments. Again, how we can make an impact even with a few dollars. And again, I think these are all really the results of the housing stakeholders. And I think really, again, thoughtful suggestions. So we're generally supportive. Clearly, we introduced a housing fund in the budget last year, and I want to echo what Mr. McDermott said about. I think at this point, it really is about having the continuing conversation to understand your priorities, sharing more information about practices that are within the community as well as outside that work. And then being thoughtful about where can we get the dollars from. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? If not, again, we thank you. We thank everyone for presenting today. Again, it was an opportunity to spark the conversation and brainstorm ideas. And I expect in the coming days and weeks, we will start to flesh out some of these things and see if there's any recommendations that can be made. So again, thank everyone for coming today. If there's nothing else that holds our attention, our meeting is adjourned.